Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Mindful Sports, where we have sports on the mind and our minds are on sports. Today, we want to shift a little bit from athletes to coaches. As coaches, there's a lot of emphasis on the physical and tactical side of the game. Your main objectives are scheduling practices, determining what skills need improvement, and studying the next opponent to devise a winning strategy. A lot of outside coach training has also started to focus on player safety, how to notice an injury, what to do when you see a player is injured, and steps for allowing them to play again. This has especially become a prominent issue with concussions. Concussions and our brain are something that have really started over the last several years to become an eye catching topic. This is even more prominent in hard contact sports like hockey and football, where you're colliding with each other all the time, and that risk of head injury increases exponentially from other sports like tennis or swimming. Some of the training, especially in youth cases, also talks about noticing abuse, how to handle those situations when you believe that there is something else wrong going on with your athlete outside of the sport. The path is set for coaches to handle many situations, and there's a lot of pressure on them to do so. Unfortunately, coaches are not often trained in understanding sports psychology. We get this is what you need to look for, this is how you need to handle this in regard to things that we can actually see, physical components. But they're not trained or taught in how to understand those mental components that come from the outside and how those physical components can affect an athlete's mind and mental state. There are many coaches who might unintentionally touch on it, but very few actually understand it. It's again similar to what we talked about in our first episode, where we mentioned holding our breath to see what happens when an athlete comes back from injury and are put in that position again, or wanting to try and build a player's confidence because they've missed several shots or they haven't been performing well and we see that they're losing confidence. We talk about those things on an overview level, but we don't really dive into the underlying issues beneath the surface. And this is how we touch on these topics, but we don't really understand them. Even harder for coaches is their jobs are on the line on top of all of the other things that they have to do. So not only are they trying to manage their athletes and other expectations, they also have to have a focus on a win now mentality. And it can be difficult to balance that win now mentality and taking care of your athletes and developing your athletes and getting your athletes into that winning form. And what does that look like? Even worse for coaches is as you move up into more competitive levels of sports, college and professional levels, that window for acceptable failure gets smaller and smaller, while the lens for criticism gets larger. This leads them to wanting players to push through struggles or injuries or sit, trade, or even release players who are underperforming to what those expectations are. And although this is understandable, given the guidelines that they're often working under, is it really the most beneficial way to go about things? How is focusing on the win and narrowing the window and in all reality, let's be honest, the business of sports impacting how we can develop and train and take care of our athletes as coaches and even as sports administrators? We're balancing all of these other expectations that generally don't seem to be athlete centered. And those are the people who make the bread and butter for coaches, for teams, for organizations. If your players are not performing and winning, your organization is not growing. You might maintain for quite a while, but you're not growing. So, should we really be focusing as much, especially as we get higher up, on those wins? Or should we be trying to focus on developing those athletes and finding out how to take care of our athletes for the long term that benefits not just our athletes, but our businesses as well? And for coaches, you're stuck in the middle because you really are there for the athletes. That is who your main audience is. But you have all of these other pressures, and that's difficult to do. And so, right now, I just want to take a real quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk some more about it. Welcome back, guys. I hope that you enjoyed having that short break. In some sports, coaching has started to change as the leagues have started to become more athlete focused. The National Basketball League, or the NBA, is a prime example of this. Players are now much more mobile in terms of their ability to move teams. This means that not only do coaches need to focus on winning and still have the expectation of building a long-term franchise, but they also have to cater towards their star players as well. It's placed even more of a burden and a balancing act on the coaches between their long-term goals and the goals of star players. Of course, there's also the issue of having to deal with the team ownership, like we talked about earlier, who have different goals and expectations. So coaches get left in this tough place or even lost because of these. That leaves the question of how can a coach use sports psychology to meet all of these conflicting goals? Taking care of their players mentally could be one of the most underutilized tools that a coach has at their disposal. Physical conditioning and technical skills are absolutely necessary for a team to be successful, but they mean very little if the mental health of the athlete is not also taken care of. If we look back at players like Dennis Rodman in the NBA or Antonio Brown in the NFL, these men were superstars and household names at the top of their game. And in a flash, it was gone because their mental state was left unchecked until it was too late. Nobody asked the deeper questions. Nobody dug into why this was happening. We merely saw that it was happening and said, yep, nope, we're not going to deal with it. It's not on us. Go somewhere else. Or simply, we can't handle this. And we don't need that. And this doesn't match up with our goals. Take care. Yes, there is plenty of blame on those athletes for their actions and the steps that they took. Unfortunately, it was probably in part due to the competitive nature of sports that helped create that belief that they needed to push through these on their own because they needed to be mentally strong, keep a competitive mindset, which is something that we push all the time in sports. There's a ring of truth to it because as an athlete, you do have to be able to block those things out and maintain a competitive mindset. But as a coach, you must be able to recognize the signs of mental strain on your athletes and understand that you have a responsibility to your athletes, not just physically, but mentally as well. You're not trying to just forget those strains or keep them to yourselves as an athlete, but as a coach, you need to make sure that those are dealt with. It can make a big difference to a coach's athlete if that coach is willing and able to initiate conversations about the tough mental questions and make sure to check in on their athlete. Having those open conversations and even bringing in a sports psychologist to the team can help athletes allow some level of stress relief to be able to improve their performance. And on top of that, it also helps to remove that stigma that we have against mental health, especially ingrained so deeply into our athletes. You think about certain players who feel like they have to be tough. And so we might hear an interview from an athlete similar to this one.
Reaction to winning this third championship.
I mean, I went through a lot. This is definitely my toughest. Yeah, I'm battling a lot of things. So
yeah, you insinuated that yesterday. What are you battling, and what's the adversity been like?
Well, I mean, 8 days ago I tore my ACL and my other knee. I'm wrestling with no ACLs, and whatever, man. I didn't want to tell anyone because F excuses.
Think about that. This kid is wrestling with 2 torn ACLs, specifically saying F excuses. That is the mindset that we have put on athletes. That an injury, even something as severe as this, as a torn ACL, is an excuse if you cannot compete. The strain that you have now put on those athletes is immense. The mental pressure now that they are under in order to have to perform and live up to that. If you're a coach or a leader, knowing where your team is mentally will not only help you achieve your goals and your organization's goals, but it will help you in that most integral part of your responsibility as a coach, which is taking care of your athletes. You are responsible for the adults or children that you are leading and developing. Do not forget that crucial piece of their development. Whether young or old, the parts of them that we cannot see are often the parts that are overlooked. It's not just about physical development or improving technical ability, but you are also a key figure in their mental development. If you find a way to help relieve some of that mental pressure that all athletes face, you will start to see an improvement in other areas. I hope that you take what you've heard here today and really think about it and think about how you can implement this into your coaching philosophy. As an athlete, how can you bring this up to your coach? I really want us to take a look at how we coach and the coaching industry as a whole and consider what ways am I helping my athletes holistically and not just on the field. That's it for today, everyone. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you again next week.